Hi! So today we are going to look at writing, and increasingly in college, as you get a lot more specialized with your major, you are going to have an increase of writing assignments, so hopefully by the end of this lecture, it will be a little less daunting whenever you have to approach writing assignments for whatever class it is that you might get them in. So, a couple of things to think about when approaching the written word, particularly the words that you are about to write. How is it that you feel about writing? You might actually do a little bit of writing for pleasure yourself. Perhaps some of you blog, maybe you have some Tumblrs or some other websites where you write for pleasure, and then maybe when it comes time for an academic assignment, it's not as fun. And think about what kind of writing assignments have you had to do and will you have to do? I imagine that in some of your AP exams you might have a written portion that you will have to do, as well as some other standardized exams that might have had essay portions to them, and even in your college applications you're going to have to write some sort of letter telling the college a little bit about yourself when you apply. So it's not avoidable that you will have to write at some point in your college career. But think about the way that you approach the written word, and think about the idea that pretty much nowadays, because of social media, whether you are writing a Facebook status or a Twitter update, or just a regular good old blog post or something on Tumblr, you are engaging with the written word. So it's not something that you don't have experience in. It's something that you do every day. So how do we do this? First off, you have to decide what the goal is of the particular project that you have to do. So let's take this writing assignment for this class, right, where you have to give me some sort of a report on a particular place of the college that you selected, right? Decide what your goal is and try to think about what the assignment is. For this class, you are going to report on a particular part of the university. For another assignment, on the other hand, it might be writing that is meant to persuade someone one way or the other. Maybe it's a research paper where you have a particular topic and you have to basically kind of teach the audience in depth about this one particular topic. Or maybe you are presented a certain set of arguments and you are made to have to agree with one or the other and explain why. So figure out what your goal is and what it is that the writing assignment calls for. Then pick your topic. Now, some writing assignments will pretty much give you your topic for you, but others, they might just say, well, you are going to write about whatever it is that you want that has to do with the subject, and you might have to choose. So oftentimes this is one of the places where students often get stuck. So a very, very easy way to choose your topic is to do a couple of things. One of them is free writing, where basically you just take a sheet of paper and you write nonstop without self-criticism for, say, a minute or two, right? Set a timer, and then for the next 2 minutes, write down every single topic that comes to mind. Another way to do something is to brainstorm, which is basically the same idea, but saying things out loud instead of writing them down. Now, the key point here is that you turn off the thing in your head that says, oh, that's a stupid idea, right? You want to be able to write down every single option you might have. Doesn't matter how silly it might seem, because you never know. Sometimes the silliest topics can end up being the most interesting papers, alright? So turn off the little voice in your head and just write. And figure out who your audience is. So, yes, for the most part, your audience might be your teacher, but think about who the audience is for that particular writing assignment. So, are you supposed to convince someone? Is this a research paper that perhaps you might want to eventually give for a conference of some sort? Is this writing meant for, say, an audience that might not necessarily know about the topic, right? So then you have to keep your language a little bit basic. Or is it strictly for the class that you're in, and therefore you can talk about things a little bit more in depth without having to explain basics, right? So for every writing assignment, there is an intended audience, so figure out who that is. Now, once you have a topic through the lovely methods of free writing and brainstorming, now you gotta research it. So, whether it is physical through actual use of going to these places that we once used to go to called libraries, whether you deal in physical books or you deal in digital mediums, there are all sorts of different ways that you can assemble that information. Doral College nowadays has some pretty decent databases where you can go and actually get scholarly articles on stuff, and you can always use your professors as a resource for different topics depending on what their strengths are. One thing you can do is you can create note cards. There's actually softwares available that can let you sort of assemble all sorts of notes and kind of keep them together. Software like Evernote or Microsoft OneNote. I believe Scrivener is another one where you can basically just sort of jot down notes from places and kind of keep them consolidated in one place. Maybe you like to kick it old school and you like to use actual physical note cards. You can do that as well. But create note cards with sort of bits of information that you're going to need, and also a reference point so that you can actually go back into the original thing and find that information. So when you create your note card, no more than one major idea per card. So let's say that you're writing a report on, let's say, the Renaissance, right? So when we think of no more than one major idea per card, you're not going to write the entirety of the Renaissance on one 3 by 5 inch card. What you're going to do is you're going to maybe write down, let's say, Leonardo da Vinci on one side, and then you write down all sorts of relevant quotes and paraphrases about Leonardo da Vinci on the back, right? You're not going to have one small card that just says artists or inventors on them, but try to break it down. So no more than one major idea per card. Paraphrasing is key, so try as much as possible to restate concepts in your own words, right? Because the idea of a writing assignment is to be original and to have sort of your own unique thoughts. We don't want to see a sea of quotes, right? So as much as possible, especially at the point of your note cards, try and restate concepts in your own words. That'll make things easy later when you're slapping them down on the page. And always put down the source info on every card and every bit of information. That way it's easier to find and also cite. And we'll get into why citation is important in a bit. Now, when it comes to style, always feel free to ask the professor if they don't already specify what citation style they prefer. Depending on what discipline they're in, whether they're a sociologist or a psychologist or a literature person, each of those disciplines actually has its own citation style, right? There is APA, MLA, and ASA, along with, Chicago style, etc. So if the professor actually specifies the style, then definitely follow it, and there are definitely a lot of online resources that will tell you, a lot of online cheat sheets that'll tell you exactly how to do it. And if there is no style, see if there is one that the professor prefers. That way you can get some practice working within a particular citation style, even if it's not actually specified. So once you have all the information, you have all of your books, you have all of your articles, you have all of your PDFs and all that stuff, you know where everything is, and it is all excellent and sort of all put together for you and you're ready to write, then try and figure out how it is that you will organize your thoughts to eventually put them down on paper. So what are your methods? One really, really easy way to organize your thoughts is to create some sort of an outline. Now, an important thing to remember about outlines is that at this point in the paper, while you're creating an outline, it's totally okay for you to change the order of things around. An outline form is actually pretty good. One specific way of structuring your paper, there might be all sorts of different ways, and your professor might have a particular preference, but one way to structure your paper is called ABBCC structure. What does that mean? First thing is the argument or thesis, which is your main point of the paper. So if you are writing about, say, if you are writing about the student center in whatever university it is that you pick for this project, then your A would probably be a sentence or two that says that I am going to write about the student center at Notre Dame University, and these are the things that happen there, etc., right? The purpose of this paper is to tell you about the student center of Notre Dame University. Right? This is where you would present your point of view or your opinion, or this might be a really, really cool part to have a really cool opening, where you grab a reader with a quote or an illustration. So, here's an example. Say that you are writing about the student center at Notre Dame University, right? You might not want to start your paper being kind of bland by just saying, this paper is where I am going to write about Notre Dame University, right? So, instead, one way to grab the reader better, and your professor in particular, would be to say something like, after a long, hard day of classes, it's nice to find a place where you can sit down, grab a bite to eat, and hang out with your friends. What better place to do that than at the Student Center at Notre Dame University? Or maybe you even go more in depth and you describe what kinds of food you might eat, right? What kinds of smells you might encounter when you first walk into the student center, right? Paint a picture. Paint a picture. Then, the next B is background, and this would be the sort of history of the topic or context. So, in our student center at Notre Dame University, you might talk about here, perhaps if the student center is named after someone, you might want to give some background as to what the student center is either named after or how long it's been there in its current incarnation. Then there is the body of the paper, where you sort of give evidence for your thesis. Now, you know, in our sort of Notre Dame University Student Center place, this might be where you would describe exactly what is located there, and exactly why this place would be considered an important part of Notre Dame student life, right? In our case, a counter-argument won't necessarily be needed, but it's always important when you are writing something, particularly something that has some sort of argumentative basis to it, to present counter-arguments. And let's say that your thesis has something to do with trying to convince somebody to to make the Monday after Super Bowl Sunday a national holiday, right? Let's say that that is your main argument, and it is an argument that I wholeheartedly support, right? So you would have, your argument is the Monday after the Super Bowl should be off. Your background might be a history of the Super Bowl. Your body might be the reasons why you think that the Monday after Super Bowl Sunday would be an incredibly necessary national holiday to have off. And then at this point you would present some counter arguments where you would say, now, critics of the Super Bowl Monday holiday have suggested that XYZ. However, then you would also have rebuttals for those counter arguments, right? Because if your point is to convince somebody, it's important for them to know what the other side says, but you can't just leave it at that. Tell them what the other side says and tell them why the other side is wrong, or on the wrong side of the argument. And then you wrap things up with a nice, neat conclusion, kind of summarizing everything together, and this is why I think that Super Bowl Monday should be a holiday, or this is why the Student Center at Notre Dame University is such a important part of this great institution, blah, 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 right? So this might be a really, really useful structure for you for any number of papers that you might have to write. Now write the thing. Now, notice how this says the first draft. Notice that we're not focusing on writing the absolutely perfect thing right off the bat. Now, when you are writing this first draft, start wherever it is that you feel confident. You don't necessarily have to start at the very, 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 very beginning. In fact, you might feel comfortable writing the meat of the paper first, and then writing the introduction and the conclusion last, so that once you know exactly what your argument is, you can better summarize it later at the end. Start wherever it is that you feel comfortable. And turn off your inner critic. This first draft is not the time for you to criticize yourself and say, oh, this paper's gonna suck. Oh, this isn't gonna work out. No, no. Turn that voice off, right? And just write freely. And go with the flow, right? If you get inspired, if you are in the moment, just keep writing. Just keep writing. And if you see that your initial outline needs some tweaking, like, oh, maybe your evidence needs to happen a little bit earlier, or if there's one section that could happen later, whatever. Modify your outline if you need it at this point. And try as much as possible to use your voice and find your voice. Your voice is the unique style you have of a writer. And you may need to modify this, of course, depending on who your audience is and what your professor is expecting from you. But try to figure out a way that you can write where it sounds natural to you. And once you're done with your first draft, forget about it. Put it away. Don't look at it. Don't touch it. Don't even breathe on it. Forget about it. Right? Then, and only then, after you've done all this stuff, then can you go back and revise your work. So, one really important thing that a lot of people neglect to do when writing their papers is they don't read their papers out loud. And it is really, really easy to catch mistakes. And, sometimes you get so deeply into a writing assignment that you just kind of forget the meanings of words, or maybe you think you've written a sentence completely, and then when it turns out that you read it out loud, then it's like, whoa, this does not make any sense whatsoever. So read your first draft out loud. You can catch a lot of things that way. And ask yourself this. Has your purpose been fulfilled? If the purpose is to deliver some sort of an argument, did you do that? If the purpose is to report or teach, did you do that effectively? Have you completed the assignment, right? If there are 3 parts to a question, did you answer all 3 parts, for example? And is it clear? If somebody else is going to read this, will it make sense to them, or does it only make sense to you? Now, this is the point where you turn on your critic and you beat that paper to shreds and be ruthless. Cut things, erase things, check and see if your ideas are ordered in a logical manner, if it sort of flows smoothly and makes sense. Oh my gosh, and this is so important, please check your punctuation and spelling. Cannot stress this enough. As much as a professor wants to say that they're not grading on punctuation and spelling, and that they will only focus on the content, if your spelling and punctuation is so bad that the professor can't get through your paper, then that is worth them not giving you a decent grade, no matter how good the content is. If your punctuation and spelling isn't up to snuff, then you've completely ruined any good chance at a decent grade, alright? So, spell check is a beautiful thing, but it won't catch everything. And it especially won't necessarily correct punctuation, right? Because you can spell there, and there correctly, but the way that you use each of those unique spellings of those words, spell checker might not necessarily catch them, right? So always check your punctuation. It is very, very important. Especially nowadays, where a lot of people like to think that they can write the way that they text, or write the way that they tweet. Not necessarily the case. So always check your punctuation and spelling. And check your citations. This is also very, very important. Make sure that for every quote, there is some sort of citation for where that thing comes from. If there is a bit of information that you did not know previously, that you got from a book, make sure that that is mentioned somewhere. That this idea came from this, right? Otherwise, you're passing stuff off as your own brand new brilliant information, and that's plagiarism, and that's wrong. So always make sure that you check your citations, that the style is good, that it matches the style that the professor set out for you to use, and make sure that for every quote there is some sort of citation for it. And make it look pretty, right? There may be professors that are more sticklers about styling and format than others, but make sure that it's one consistent font throughout. Make sure that the spacing between lines is exactly the way that it should be, if it needs to be double spaced or 1.5 spaced, right? Make sure that it is that it looks good, right? All the margins look good, the paragraphs look good. If your paper looks like one giant paragraph, please break that up. Makes it way easier to read. Make sure that you pick a font that is legible. Some professors might be very, very specific with the fonts they like to see. Others are not specific. When they are not specific, usually the go-to is Times New Roman, but some of them might be more lenient in terms of style. But I would suggest not using a font that makes your letters look huge, because you might think that you're making the paper easier to read for the professor, but all the professor is going to see is you trying to cheat the page count, alright? So make it look pretty, and make sure that your content stands out, not any attempts you might be making at trying to stretch out the page count. So, once you've done all of that, then it's time to kind of step back from your work a little bit and evaluate it and see if your paper has accomplished your goal to report, research, or convince someone, for example. Pretend you're the instructor. Put yourself in their shoes and see if it is up to snuff for them. Check the mechanicals. What are the mechanicals? The mechanicals are things like grammar, spelling, and punctuation. And always, always, always do this. Have a fresh pair of eyes to look at it. When you sit with a writing assignment for way too long, words lose their meanings, and it can be a hot mess, but you won't necessarily know that because you're so deeply into the project. So always have a fresh pair of eyes to look at it. And then make sure your message is appropriate, right? That it is appropriate for the purpose of the assignment. Take one more look at word choice, grammar, and spelling. Are you using 15 words when 2 would do? Right? Always make sure that you're using words accurately as well. And think about it once you get your paper back. Try and think of what are the things you could have done differently, but at the same time, remember all the stuff that you've actually accomplished, right? You produced some decent work. I'm sure all of you produce really, really, really good work, and that is something worth patting yourself on the back. Now, one really, really big thing is plagiarism, and every single university has an academic honesty policy that covers not only cheating on things like exams, but also plagiarism in papers in particular. So, whenever you are quoting or paraphrasing something, always note the source, and don't just use one source in order to write your paper. A lot of times professors will even just tell you have to use a minimum of 3 sources, right? Even when they don't tell you that, use a minimum of like 3 to 5 sources. Use quotation marks when quoting directly. Sometimes you might try to like copy and paste some stuff and then not add the quotation marks, and then, before you know it, you're being called into some sort of dean's office because you didn't use quotation marks and you're trying to pass off the work of, I don't know, William Shakespeare as your own, right? Don't do it. Always make sure that you're using quotation marks when quoting directly, and even when you're paraphrasing, even when you're trying to put ideas into your own words, cite, cite, cite. Now, even when things are from the web, even if you're citing something from a YouTube video, if you're citing someone's Facebook status, whatever it is, nowadays, the styles, whether it's the APA, MLA, ASA, Chicago style, whatever it is, a lot of these folks are hip enough to know how to cite things, even like a tweet, right? There are even citation rules for a tweet. For a tweet, for an email, for IM conversations, right? So, it being from the web is no excuse to not properly cite your stuff, right? Because all of these people have rules and regulations for, even things like a YouTube video, right? So don't plagiarize. Don't plagiarize. Don't plagiarize. Cool. Now, I hope that some of these tips and tricks will help make your writing assignments be a little bit less daunting. So join in next time when we take your words from the paper to the stage in public speaking. See you soon.